So our next keynote speaker, our next guest speaker, a bit like myself, has spent a bit of time behind bars. I was there for 1 day for work, Elliot slightly longer. But Elliot is scammer, fraudster, but turned business advisor, and now advises companies and businesses and organizations on how to avoid these certain scams. So with that, I'd like to hand you over to Elliot Castro.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. How's everyone doing? Good. Brilliant. So I think I'd like to just first of all start off by saying thank you so much to Hayley and the Distology team for having me here today. The truth of the matter is, whenever I'm doing any of these events, it is always a humbling experience to think that people are that interested in your story, they want to come and hear you talk about it. So thank you for your interest today. I don't know if you know anything at all about me, or if this is the first time you've even heard of me. But 20 years ago, I ended up in prison for 2 years. And the reason for that was that I had been on a crime spree, I suppose you can call it, for about 5 years prior to that. So I grew up in Glasgow, just if you didn't recognise the accent for any reason. I grew up in Glasgow, and my first experience of fraud was when I was about 15 or so, and I discovered a credit card on a train. Someone had dropped it or lost it or whatever. And I was attending a school at the time, which was a boarding school, so I went up on Monday, came back on Friday. So I found this credit card on the train. Obviously I had an inkling of what credit cards could do. So I thought, okay, let's just buy my ticket for school and use the card for that, and then I can keep the money that my parents had given me for sweets or something like that, So that was the first time that I ever did anything. So what happened was the ticket inspector came round, and I gave him the card and I gave him my travel pass, completely oblivious to the fact that the name was different on both of these. Schoolboy error, literally. But what happened essentially was the ticket inspector came along, said nothing about it, just processed it. I signed for it. And that was, as far as I was concerned, was the end of the matter. However, as you'll find out later, this was to be one of 2 occasions on which I misjudged other people's gut feelings. So what happened essentially was the train came to a halt at the station, the following station, and then didn't move for some time. Now, if any of you regularly travel by train, I'm sure you'll appreciate this is not exactly an unusual circumstance. However, the train did not move for quite some time, and the next thing I saw was 2 police officers coming on the train, headed straight for me, and said, "We need a word with you." So I then proceeded to try and explain away the fact that the card was in a different name by saying that a friend had loaned me their card, because just had amazing friends at that time. And they believed me, but still radioed through to check the card. And unfortunately, whoever had dropped it had been very diligent in cancelling it quickly. And that was that. So I got taken back to my school by the police, and the sort of headmistress type lady that was there, she was not impressed, to say the least. However, she did me a turn because she managed to talk them round, and they never charged me, and the matter was just sort of swept under the carpet. So that was the first time. And you might think that that would have been enough. However, it wasn't. So I try not to sort of go into too much about my early life, etc., because I'm aware of time and it can be difficult to get through everything. But just to kind of give you an idea, I don't know how many schools you all went to. I went to 8 different schools because I just couldn't seem to get along in any of those schools. When I was young, I had a lot of trouble relating to people my own age. I always found it easier to get on with people older than me. So for that reason, when I was at school, I became a bit of an outcast, a bit of a loner, if you like. And I spent a lot of time in my own head with my own imagination, which was absolutely wild, as you'll soon find out. So, having left school at the age of 16, I decided to try and find some gainful employment, and I worked for a mobile phone network in Glasgow, which was the job I was doing. They were taking inbound calls, sales calls, from both personal and business customers. So that went well for a time. People were calling in every day to place orders, and I began to realise that they were calling in and giving all these card details and stuff like that. So I thought, okay, wonder what could maybe be done with this. So I started keeping a notebook next to my desk, and when customers would call in, instead of processing their transaction immediately, what I would quite often do is I would tell them to hold and then come back to them and say, listen, I'm really sorry, but I've got your bank on the line here. And, they're asking some security questions. So I already had all the card details, the card number, etc. Bear in mind as well that we are talking about the late 90s here, so things were very, very different in terms of card security. Not, the way they are today with various different things. Chip and PIN wasn't around. A lot of transactions were processed just with card numbers and expiry dates, as opposed to doing address verifications and things like that. So it was very different. But anyway, so I kept this notebook, and one day I came into the office and I was asked by my manager to come to another office. So I walked in and she was there with someone from HR. So I sat down and, they said, well, listen, unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go. And I just pleaded ignorance. I said, well, why? And she said, because this is the 4th time that you've been late in 2 weeks. So that was the end of that part of my career in sales. However, I left that job with that notebook, which was full of details. I went home, told my parents that, I'd been relieved of my duties. They were not impressed at all. And, you can understand to a certain degree at that time when you're 16 years old and your parents tell you something and you think you know better, you think you know everything. But you don't really, but you think you do. So I decided to disappear off to Manchester. I don't know why. Someone told me the streets were paved with gold or something. I think I got the wrong city. But anyway, so disappeared off to Manchester at the age of 16 full of hopes and dreams and a notebook full of card details. So when I arrived in Manchester, the first thing I had to do was get somewhere to stay. So I booked a hotel over the phone with card details, and they took the payment. That was all paid for. And when I arrived at the hotel, I realised that with the details I had in the notebook, I could access the accounts. So I called up the different banks and accessed the accounts and arranged for secondary cards to be sent out to me in my name. At the time, I had a lot of very generous uncles who wanted to add me to their accounts. So these cards would arrive with my name embossed on them, so there was no fear of someone saying, oh, this isn't your card. I said, well, yes, it is. Here's my passport. So it was fantastic for that reason. Just to kind of fill in the gap slightly, up until that point, I had been arrested various times, just, for small things here and there, and nothing had really ever came of it. Excuse me. So the Manchester experience was essentially that I had this notebook and I used it until all the details ran out, which took maybe 2 or 3 months or something like that. Following that, obviously, I had sort of discovered that these cards were useful, because I could go and buy things and all I had to do was sign someone's name. My feeling at the time was that my understanding of things was that if someone had lost their card and someone else used it, or someone else was using their details or whatever, then as long as the person wasn't aware of it and didn't authorise it, that they would be refunded by their card company. Now, I know that that is the case. However, the thing that I sort of put out of my mind was the effect that might have on people in terms of people getting stressed out and finding out this has happened and how to deal with it, etc. So Once the notebook ran out, I was then in a position where I had to find some other way because I wasn't working in the call centre anymore. I didn't have these details coming into me on a daily basis like I had previously. So I remember very clearly, I don't remember which hotel it was, but I remember exactly what happened. And I was waiting to check in. There was someone standing in front of me checking in, and the gentleman had done all these bits and pieces, filled in all these papers and stuff like that, and the reception said, right, Mr. So-and-so, you're in room such and such on the 3rd floor or whatever, have a lovely stay and let us know if there's anything we can do for you. So I'd heard this whole thing, done my check-in, went to my room, and then used my mobile to call the hotel, asked for this gentleman's name, say his name was Mr. Smith, got put straight through to the room, and then when he answered the phone, I said, good afternoon, Mr. Smith. It's Peter here calling from the reception. I'm the duty manager. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you. It's a little bit embarrassing, but there's been an issue processing your card. We can clear this up for you in just a second, and I was just wondering, could I just check some details with you? Yes, of course, no problem. So I then proceeded to ask lots of questions that I knew would allow me to access that account. So I needed the full card number, I needed the expiry date, I needed the CV2 code, I needed the mother's maiden name, date of birth, blah, 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 blah. And then at this point, this opened a new door because it was incredibly successful, to the point where I would say at the time, it was successful around about 80% of the time. How successful in terms of the number of details I would get would be very much dependent on who the person was I was speaking to and how much they were taken in by the story. But one of the things that in my current day occupation, dealing with lots of my clients and security matters, one of the things that we always talk about is the importance of the small detail. So let me give you an example. When I would call, so what I started doing, before I get to that, what I started doing was calling different hotels around the country and asking for Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones or any other common surname in the English language. And invariably, there would be someone with one of those names. So when the call was connected to the guest, instead of speaking straight away, what I would do is I would listen for them answering, and then as if speaking to someone in the distance, I would say, could you get housekeeping onto that room for me, deal with such and such a situation? And then I would come back, oh, sorry, sir, didn't realise you'd answered. It's blah, 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 calling from the reception here. And just little things like that, the small detail really is what can make the difference between success and failure. I don't just mean in a fraud environment. Obviously, I can see you all rushing off to try it, but you know what I mean. So it's not that; it's just that the small detail is super important. So then began a period of about, I would say, roughly 4 years or so, 3.5, 4 years or something of escalating values of crimes. So what I mean by that is when I first started doing what I was doing, the things I was buying, quite honestly, were daft. CD singles, haircuts, T-shirts from Topshop or something like that. What made a huge difference to my thinking about the potential was when, on one occasion, the card that I received after doing the aforementioned procedure was a corporate card. Now, I'm sure some people in this room will have a corporate credit card or a business credit card of some description. But these were, at the time, to me, a boon, because basically you could buy things of quite large value without any questions being asked. So there was one particular credit card provider who I will not name, but they were very helpful, because what they would let you do is you could call them past security and say, listen, I'm just calling to let you know, but I will be buying this flight today. It's going to be £8,000. Or I'm going to be purchasing something from this place and it will be £12,000. And they would say, oh, that's fine. We'll put a wee marker on there to say that you're doing that so you can be sure that the transaction is going to go through. guaranteed success, right? I mean, that was perfect. So that meant that in a lot of cases, I could be certain that wherever I was going to or whatever I was planning on buying, that there wouldn't be any hassle. And so about that time was when the international travel began. So it started, the level of purchases started going up and up and up. CDs, haircuts went from that to, buying clothes from Bond Street or traveling to Los Angeles and taking a trip down Rodeo Drive, etc., etc. So that's kind of where things started to get a bit mental, because bear in mind at the time, I was only like 18, 19, 20 years old. So in some ways, a daft wee boy. And essentially, I became aware of that I was being hunted at that point as well. So basically, I found out I was on a trip to Ireland and I got arrested at Dublin Airport because someone from some airline there had noticed that I was travelling a lot, first class, business class, and obviously maybe didn't quite look the part for some reason. Cheeky bastards. However, that was the way it came across. And when I was picked up at Dublin Airport, I was taken to the police station there, and it became apparent that someone from Expedia, I don't know if you've ever used that. Is that even still a thing? I don't know. Maybe they've closed down after losing all the business I gave them or something. Who knows? But yeah, Expedia had basically made a note that I was booking things. And as I say, at this time, there wasn't the level of security there is. There wasn't any 3D secure, wasn't anything like that. This was just card number, expiry date, boom, did it go through? Yes or no? Okay, your tickets have been issued. But they had become aware of me and put a marker against my name so that any time anything was booked in my name, it would flag up to say, that this is a red flag or whatever terminology they would use. So that was an insight for me that all was not well, So I basically started using other names to travel or using variations of my name. So instead of it being Elliot Castro, I would maybe change some letters about, thinking that would fool their system. And it must have done initially, because I definitely got away with it a couple of times. However, I then travelled to Canada. And what happened in Canada, I visited Canada on 2 occasions. I'll tell you about both of those because they're quite interesting, both of them. But the first time I went, I had a little, again, just sort of talking about small detail and trying to think ahead. Whenever I would return to any hotel room I was staying in, I had a thing that I would do. And that would be, I would knock the door and I would say, housekeeping, and hear, if there was any sort of movement inside the room. Obviously, if housekeeping were in the room, their trolley would be outside. If the trolley wasn't outside and someone was in the room, then we might have a problem. So on this one occasion, I knocked the door and I could hear sort of walkie-talkies inside the room. Not great, okay? So I dumped whatever shopping I had and made a dash down the corridor, found the back stairs, disappeared off down the back stairs. I didn't even know if there was someone behind me or not, but I wasn't taking any chances. So I got down to the ground floor and then ended up through the kitchens. There's chefs walking about with plates and bonkers. Managed to find the back door, pushed my way through the back door and went down a sort of set of stairs at the back of the hotel. And there was a car sitting with an older gentleman in the car. So I chapped his window and he rolled down and said, yeah. And I said, Canadian Secret Service, we need to commandeer your vehicle. I just showed him my wallet. I don't even know what he might have seen in my wallet, but this guy, amazing. He told me that he was in the Canadian military previously and he was only too happy to help. So I like to think that I gave this guy an adventure, right? I told him to take me to the airport, so he did. And then when we got to the airport, he said, where do you want me to take you? And asked me if I wanted him to drop me at the police station at the airport. So I said, no, just take me to the terminal. And I had one of the things I would always do when I was away somewhere is I always kept my passport with me. no matter what, just in case. So I think I flew to Chicago here and then onwards somewhere after that. The second time I went to Canada was a different experience altogether. This was probably one of the worst experiences I've had in my life. So same scenario, got back to the hotel, this time, didn't knock the door and walked into the room. I was immediately put into a position with my hands behind my back and a set of handcuffs on. And the indignation from me, I was like, what is this? How dare you? This is a disgrace. And it turned out that, so the whole Expedia thing that I thought I was getting away with, I wasn't. Someone else had picked up on it. So I was taken to court in Canada. I was put into a prison in Toronto called the Don Jail, which I spent three or 4 months in. I can't remember. I was eventually given a sentence of a year. They caught me with like $5,000 in cash and various credit cards and things like that. So I got a sentence of a year, but because the prisons were so awful, the conditions, in the prison were so awful, the judges were giving either 3 or 4 days to 1 credit for the time that you'd spent there. So I was ordered to be deported from Canada. And there's a thing that they do. So when you're being deported, they don't tell you when you're being deported. You just know it's coming. Obviously, that wasn't good enough for me. I wanted to know when I was leaving. So I contacted the immigration department and I just asked them, I said, look, I'm phoning to find out when I'm being deported. We can't tell you that for security reasons. I was like, right, okay, fine. So I called back the next day, but approached it slightly differently. When the call was answered, I said, good afternoon, it's Howard from the British Embassy. I'm just calling up to find out about Mr. Castro. His family have expressed some concern about his deportation. And, he was like, oh, yeah, Mr. Castro, he's being deported on Monday. And then he proceeded to say, we've also got a notification here to let Detective Ralph Eastgate know at Heathrow Airport. He's looking to speak to Mr. Castro as well. And I took a moment and then I said, oh, that's okay. The embassy will deal with that for you. What was his name again? And then he said, oh, it's Ralph Eastgate. He said, thanks so much. That saves me a lot of trouble. So then followed the tensest 5 days of my life, okay? So I knew I was getting deported on the Monday. On the Monday, they came, took me from the prison to the detention centre at the airport. I was there for about 2 or 3 hours. Then someone came to collect me. They boarded me onto the plane and handed a very sort of official beige envelope with a Canadian wax seal on it to the porter on the plane, the purser. And supposedly he was supposed to take me to border control when we arrived. However, through the flight, he'd come over, obviously curious to see a young man being deported, started asking what happened. And I said, oh, you know what? It was ridiculous. I got into a fight, had a few drinks, got into a scuffle, blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, now, between me and you, I think he might have been gay and he might have fancied me a little bit, right? So that was helpful. When we got to London, he gave me his the envelope with everything in it, my passport, my deportation documents, the tickets for my journey, etc. And he said, good luck with everything. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. So I got off the plane and walked to border control, literally still not knowing for sure if someone had been alerted to me coming back or not. And I was sweating a lot more than I am right now. The walk took about 5-10 minutes to get from the gate to, landside. And even then, I'm still not sure, it's a very paranoid lifestyle when you're doing what I was doing, by the way, just to point that out. You never fully know if you're in a place of safety or not, However, I made it to the other side and I managed to I just thought I have to just get out of this airport because I knew he was based at this airport and he'd be probably looking for me. So I managed to get out of there, made a detour via a friend's house in London, and then I was kind of stuck because I had no money. They'd taken all my cash off me. I had no credit cards. I had no details. I had nothing. So I sat down and looked through the envelope and all the details were there for my deportation, all the rest of it. And then I came across the airline ticket that they'd sent me back on. And upon closer inspection, the ticket had all the card details of the card that Canadian Immigration had used to book my trip home. So obviously I had a look at that and put it straight in the bin. And somehow managed to get back to Glasgow. Can't imagine how that was, but yeah. So I got back to Glasgow, and from there, that was kind of the beginning of the end, really. Just sort of mindful of the time as well. So from there, I ended up in a hotel in Glasgow one night. I bumped into some famous DJs who were playing in Glasgow that night. One or two of them lived in Belfast and invited me over, obviously not knowing what I was up to. So I made my way over to Belfast and ended up renting a flat there and trying to not do too much fraud anymore. It didn't quite work out. So I then I had another thing that for the last year or so I was doing, which was, so if you hold certain credit cards and let's say, hypothetically speaking, you end up stranded overseas, you lose your passport, you've got no money or whatever. So some of these cards, what they'll do is, if you contact them, they will wire you money. So that was helpful. What I would do is I would arrange for money to be sent to different Western Union locations or MoneyGram or any of these sorts of money transfer organisations. And then I would get the train down to Dublin because obviously that was a different country, that was overseas. And I would go around these locations, collect money, and then come back up to Belfast. And I think the most that I ever collected in one day was at roughly £35,000, there or thereabouts. Just in a daft wee rucksack, coming back up to Belfast with 35 grand. Mental, absolutely bonkers. And I really mean that, by the way, right? Because see, when I'm sitting here in front of you as a 40-year-old looking back at what I did when I was a teenager, excuse the language, but I've got to say, fucking hell, what were you doing? So yeah, it was a mental time. But as I say, this was like the beginning of the end. So what happened was, in Belfast, I started to become friendly with some people. And for probably the first time in my life, had some good friends around me. Yes, granted, they did not know what I was really up to. No one did. But if you take all of that out of the equation, we were still good friends. So we got on as people, The situation, so how it all came crashing down, I'd booked a flight for my friend and I, so a really good friend of mine at the time, to travel to Amsterdam for a few days for a holiday for his birthday. I was paying for it, obviously. Someone was paying for it. However, in the course of getting ready for travelling, given everything that had happened, one of the security steps that I had for myself was I would always contact the airline's central reservation desk before I left. And what I would do is I would contact that phone number. This is when people still did use the phone to contact airlines. Pointless these days, by the way. I was on the phone to BA for about an hour this morning. However, I contacted, I think it might have been BA, I'm not sure. Contacted the airline anyway. I said, hi, yes, it's such and such calling from the desk at Belfast International. The systems are down just now. Are you able to check a booking for me? Oh, no problem, no problem. So I give them the locator, they check the booking. And on this occasion, she came back and said, oh. She said, yeah, there's a problem with that one. She said, there's a marker on there saying that it's potentially fraud. Is the passenger still with you? And I said, well, actually, no, he's just popped out for a cigarette. And she said, oh, right, okay. I said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to call security? She said, yeah, if you wouldn't mind. I said, okay, don't worry, I'll deal with that. So yeah, we didn't go to Amsterdam that day. And we ended up booking a flight to Edinburgh instead from the other airport in Belfast. Excuse me. So not quite as glamorous. However, it was the best I could do with a bad situation. He was disappointed. I was disappointed. Everyone was disappointed. So we ended up in Edinburgh, checked into the hotel. The following morning, I got up, showered, and said to him, look, I'll be back in about half an hour. And from there, I went across the road to Harvey Nicks in Edinburgh and went to the customer service desk and asked for £2,000 of gift vouchers on a card that, unusually for the time, actually wasn't in my name. I can't remember how that had happened, but on this occasion it was in someone else's name. So when I went up to the desk, I asked for the vouchers, and the cashier said to me, do you have any ID? Which is a fair question. And I said, look, don't worry about it, it's fine. Contact American Express, they'll clarify everything. So she did. I spoke to them, and they passed all the security questions, and they confirmed with the cashier that it was fine to go ahead. However, just like the first time that I stumbled, the second time was much the same. I walked away from that thinking I had aced it. She was totally convinced and had the vouchers in my pocket. However, what I didn't know was that the minute I left, she was straight on the phone to American Express saying something along the lines of, listen, something's not right about this. Can you check this, please? And then they've contacted the card holder, who's obviously said, no, I didn't just buy £2,000 of gift vouchers at Harvey Nicks. And when I went back to the shop to spend the vouchers, I was walking around with the menswear manager, and at one point said, I need to go to the loo. Went to the loo, and then when I opened the door to come out, this guy was standing in front of me, grabbed my wrist and said, I remember exactly his voice, he said, all right, mate, we need that word with you. So that was that. And there was I'd managed to talk myself out of lots of situations very similar to that one. But on this particular day, it wasn't happening. There was about 6 different cards and different names and all sorts of stuff in my wallet. So there was no way. I mean, you can only have so many uncles. So that was it. And then from there, it's a kind of slightly convoluted story as to how it actually got to court in London, but it did. And I was sentenced to 2 years, of which I served a year. And I was released in 2005. So I always feel it's important to point that out. It was a long time ago. And then since then, I've had the great fortune of writing a book about my experiences, which is called Other People's Money. And as a result of doing the book, I've been invited to speak at various events just like this one, as well as doing private work with firms to build their fraud capacity in terms of, dealing with potential dangerous situations. So it's been quite a ride. But yeah, I think, do you want to do some questions now? Yeah. So thanks for listening to me. Thank you.
Some might say fraudster, criminal, scammer. Do you know what I'm going to say? Hustler, entrepreneur, problem solver.
You can stay.
Idea generator, lucky, great storyteller. It's your job. Seriously, so how many people would hire this man in their businesses? All right?
That's amazing.
All right.
Thank you. That's literally made my day, by the way, honestly.
As a teenager, what you were doing and the confidence levels that you exhibited, if we saw that in our teenage kids today, my God, how ace would our workforce be, right? So it's our generation, so this is much better. Anyway, so questions. So my question was really to backtrack a little bit actually to your education. And I know you said you had 8 schools, and we touched upon this briefly, didn't we? But you had a certain skill set, and it is a skill set, and we talked about that right at the top of the day here, skill sets, core competencies that just don't get identified in schools. It's a whole other soapbox moment for me. But what do you think that you said that you weren't accepted, you didn't feel, what do you think would have made the difference for you?
So in our conversation previously, I was saying to Hayley earlier on that I'd started taking therapy at the start of this year. Partly due to my mum passing away, but also just due to sort of wanting to be curious about myself and wonder why things had gotten that way. I always find sometimes when I talk about this, I have to really sort of be careful, because I don't ever want to sound as though I'm saying, well, I did what I did because I had a difficult childhood or whatever, because I don't believe that myself. I don't believe that to be the case. But the education system when I was growing up was very, very different. Nowadays, it is much more accepted for young people to have, or to be what's, I think the official kind of terminology is like neurodiversity, that kind of thing, right? And I mean, don't be wrong. I think sometimes when you look at that situation, you see that some people have perhaps been that way their whole lives and just not realised it. And actually part of our conversation earlier was I was saying to Hayley that I'm considering being diagnosed for ADHD, just to see if that is in fact something, because the more I read about it and the more I know about it, I think, yeah, that sounds familiar, But I think for me personally, I mean, what happened at school was that I found it very difficult to have banter with other kids, because I found the stuff that they were talking about was so juvenile that I just couldn't deal with it, so it was difficult because I wanted to get along with people, but I was on some other planet, to be quite honest with you. And what ended up happening was at school I was called bad, all sorts of stuff that, you'll never make it, you think you're something special, you'll never be anything. And every time I hear of stories like that from other people, it grates me and it touches me inside, because I think how awful of these people to do that and say that to young kids, So the bottom line was that they thought there was something wrong with me. That was we think there might be something wrong with you. But we don't know what it is. And they assessed me for Asperger's syndrome, which they turned out they didn't think I had. I had to see an educational psychologist for some time. And then the school that I spoke about at the very start, that was a school that I was put into, it was a school officially, but it was a residential unit. So it was like a house that 2 or 3 boys stayed in. I was one of those, obviously. You go up on the Monday, back on the Friday sort of thing. So I don't know if that even answers your question. To be honest with you, I might have went a roundabout kind of way there, but yeah.
I think to summarise, we just need to be a little bit more open-minded about what skill sets our kids have nowadays.
I would say so, yeah.
But yeah. So questions from you guys. Oh my God, loads of questions. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Elliot.
Hello.
Like the Glaswegian Leonardo DiCaprio. People often talk about, when people have been in prison, reoffending rates and what help they get in prison and when they come out and reoffend. When you came out in 2005, I think you said, did you ever get tempted?
Yes, frequently. Because if you can imagine that for 4 or 5 years, that had been my way of life. When I came out of prison, I was still in a situation where I didn't have any money really and things like that. Where I was so lucky, and I'm always super grateful for this, is that I was given the opportunity to do the book, because what that did was 2 things. Number one, it gave me something to focus on. And number 2, I guess internally, it made me realise that, if you write a book about something like this and put yourself in the public eye, you can't then go back and start doing it again, because, people might recognise you. So there was that. But also the last spell in prison, I'd realised, I'd seen older people, bearing in mind the age I was at the time, so I'd seen older people who were, in the time I was there, in and out 2 or 3 times. And I thought, okay, that's not what I want to be when I'm that age. So there was certainly a desire to stop. And also towards the end, I got kind of clumsy a little bit, or not clumsy, but just, I guess maybe just I didn't want to do it anymore. And some people have suggested to me in the past, they've said, do you think that maybe you wanted it to end? And although at the time I would never have admitted that, I think in retrospect, looking it back at, the way it was, I think that probably was the case. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Elliot.
Hi.
You seem, in your early days, certainly to be a big risk taker. If you look back, maybe in the book or maybe since you've reflected on your earlier life, what was the biggest risk you think you took on any one day?
That's a good question. So see, just to kind of put things in context, right? Back at that time, I felt that I had nothing to lose because that's how my life was at the time. I didn't really have much of a group of friends, if at all. I had my parents were brilliant, but, I couldn't really have that sort of relationship with them properly. So I felt at the time, I think it was more just a case of I was just living in the moment, didn't really think about the future. In terms of trying to be sort of more direct with your question, in terms of taking risks, so does it count if you've had a drink when you've done it? Does that work at all? Because that makes you just a little bit more ballsy. But yeah, so I was staying in a hotel in Manchester, and I returned, and I was 3 sheets to the wind. And I walked upstairs, and they had their sort of cafe breakfast area, and I noticed the card machine. And I went over and had a look at it, and the card for processing refunds had been left there as well. So I refunded £2,500 onto my Royal Bank of Scotland debit card, and then went to bed and passed out. Needless to say, first thing in the morning, police. So that was possibly one of the stupidest risks I've taken. I don't know if it was the biggest one, but yeah, there was lots of risks, to be honest with you. Lots of risks. It's hard to pinpoint one, but I know that I just didn't really, risk wasn't really something that I even considered. If I felt like doing something, I just did it. Thanks.
Cheers again. Just a quick one. Throughout your journey, was there any skills that you probably realised you're a lot better than the majority of the people that you could have put in a more legitimate sense? And was there also any skills that you developed which you probably didn't realise you were that individual from the more that you were doing?
Sorry, could you just repeat the first part of your question?
Yeah, so was there any skills that you could have used from all the different elements that you used that you could have put in a more legitimate sense or a professional manner, even if it was speaking now, convincing people to put in a career?
Yeah. So I think one of the questions that I'm asked quite a lot is, do you regret doing what you did? Now, I could sit here and bullshit you and say, oh, I'm full of regret, right? And don't get me wrong, there are parts of what I did that I do regret, The parts that caused harm to other people, I'm not proud of that. But I believe with every fibre of my being that everything you do in your life makes you the person you are. So I try not to focus on what I did before and more focus on what I can do now. So in terms of, I'm getting to your question. So in terms of you asking sort of what skill sets it provided me with, I think it's given me an understanding of how to successfully communicate with people, particularly in person. In my life today, I'm a sales director for a company up in Scotland. So I run a team of salespeople, some of which over the last year have come into my business very young, eager to make money, a bit lost in life perhaps, reminding me of myself. And I often wonder and say to myself, if I had had an opportunity like that at that time, how different might my life have been? So for them, I had one guy who works for me, he's a young guy, Polish, he moved here when he was 7, he's now 25, he was working in Wetherspoons, washing dishes for £350 a week. He was put in touch with me through someone else that works for me, came in to work for me. It took me 2 months to convince him to come and join us. and I was in a car with him. We had a chat. Dropped him off at home one night, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "Thank you, you've changed my life." And that, I nearly burst into tears when he said that, because that was an enormous, I mean, even thinking about it now, actually, I'm getting goosebumps. So in terms of questioning what skills it's given me, I think, you know, if you look at sort of what skills people normally talk about, then I would say communication skills for sure. However, I think one of the other things that it's allowed me to do is to help people who, I'm not saying that he would have ended up in crime, but he was definitely a bit lost. And so are some of the other guys who work for me as well. So I see myself as being in a position, because a lot of them know about what I did, you know, it's kind of common knowledge throughout the company. So, but just being able to help people and point them in the right direction, you know, and stop them from maybe veering off on a path that might cause them some harm. Sorry, that was a pretty long-winded answer, but hopefully it answers your question.
Thank you, Elliot. And another round of applause, please, for our wonderful guest.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rob, prisons, recruitment. So thank you so much, everybody, for today and sitting and being patiently listening to us wang on about all wonderful stuff, OT and people and all the good stuff that we are engaged with every day. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do fill out your feedback forms. Claire will kill me if I don't ask you that. And do spend time, mingle, have a drink, whatever you need to do. If those going to CRN with us, wish us luck, please. We really want to win. If we don't, never mind, everyone's great. Whatever. And so have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you so much. And any feedback or any other information, please come and talk to us, because very, very clear, you ask the right questions, sometimes those answers appear and you get what you want or not. Anyway, thank you guys. Take care.